Hello, and welcome to Saving People, Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Over the course of our first season, we talked about gender, parenting, faith, family structures, sibling relationships, and concepts of free will and sacrifice, among many others. Today, we are launching into season 2 with a discussion of episode 1, In My Time of Dying, through the theme of family. I am Abigail, your host, and joining me today is Hannah.
Hello, delightful to be back. Rounded out the last season, glad to be here to start the next one.
Yes, this is your 3rd episode in a row, so welcome to season 2.
Oh my god, yes it is. What can I say? I've got what is that, a hat trick?
There, yes, look at you and your hockey lingo. Impressive.
I think I learned it. I can't tell you where I learned it. I don't know why I have sports knowledge suddenly.
I mean, that one could be from me, but hockey's the one sport I know things about. So it is now time for our series recap, The Road So Far. And what that's going to look like today is a brief recap of the season 1 finale. So the Winchesters have been hunting down the demon that killed Mary and Jess for months. But when they finally meet it, the demon takes possession of John, nearly kills Dean, but is eventually banished when Sam shoots John in the leg, but refuses to shoot him in the heart and kill the demon. So the demon escapes. And when Sam is driving to the hospital to take John and Dean for help, a semi-truck driven by another demon crashes into the Impala, leaving all 3 unconscious. That brings us to this episode, season 2, episode 1, In My Time of Dying, and to our 30-second recap. Again, a banger of an episode with not a small amount going on.
Oh god, the confidence I felt coming into this. I say this every time. You really would think that I would learn to anticipate the 30-second recap. And yet, here I am, 3 episodes in a row, and I went, fuck.
I mean, I've done 22 episodes in a row and I don't anticipate it ever. So we just hope for the best.
Count me in.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, go.
In this episode, we find out the conclusion of the car crash from the prior episode, end of season 1. The results are that Sam is up and about and walking, miraculously okay. John has just woken up and Dean is in a coma. We see Dean walking around the hospital, but turns out he's actually in a limbo state. He interacts with Tessa the Reaper, tries to fight to get back into his body, communicates with Sam via a Ouija board, and John makes a deal with the yellow-eyed demon to save Dean's life, whispers a secret in Dean's ear, and dies.
That was an amazing recap.
Okay.
Count me in.
3, 2, 1, go.
So Dean wakes up, but it turns out he's not actually awake. He is in a Reaper's sandbox where he is seeing the hospital. He is seeing what is happening with John and Sam, but he can't actually communicate with them. So as he is trying to figure out what to do, John and Sam are having yet again arguments about the demon, about what to do next, and about how to save Dean. John decides on his own to make a deal to save Dean, while Sam is unable to stop him, and the episode ends with John's death.
Nice. I respect it.
I think I covered mostly the same stuff you did, but a little bit more, a little bit color. It's now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. Last week, we talked about the season 1 finale through the theme of free will. And this week, we will be talking about this episode through the theme of family. These 2 themes are kind of our bookend themes for each season because they really are the themes that have driven this show for 15 years. And we want to explore them. So the theme of family, there's a lot here. where do we want to start?
Where do we want to start?
So maybe let's start with the aftermath and the fallout from last episode. We talked a bunch last time about how the season 1 finale really gives Sam this opportunity of choosing between what his priorities are. If his priority is John and the revenge mission and killing the demon, or if his priority is ensuring his family's safety, and choosing Dean and choosing to protect John, and Sam makes that choice to be on to be protecting Dean and to be on that end of of things.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, that was the entire season 1 buildup, was sort of this decision, right? And we were led to believe it was Dean's decision, right? The emphasis is on Dean. It's on his tension in the family, his values, sort of.
He's the one that goes to get Sam.
Right.
The one dragging Sam along.
Instigating all of this. And then you realize it's not about Dean's decision in the midst of this. It's about Sam's decision as to where he fits in with it. And we were texting about Sam really going all in on Dean. Even though we've given away obviously the end of the episode, where John makes a deal with the yellow-eyed demon and dies in theory in exchange for Dean. Even though like that's the end, the whole episode is Sam going, John, why aren't you as in on saving Dean as you should be?
Yeah.
Right. Sam is a little bit feral, right? He is.
Oh, he's entirely fair, because John has given no indication. John gives no indication in this episode until the very end that he's actually prioritizing finding a solution.
In no way. In no way does he communicate that. Not implicitly, not explicitly. The entire assumption is that once again he's focused on the demon, right?
His lack of it. So even though his plan is clearly, when we find out at the end of the episode that he's made this deal, like that's what he's been working towards this whole episode, because he doesn't communicate that to Sam has no way of knowing. And all of the history, even in the previous episode, the history, the way that John has communicated is that the killing the demon comes first. He even said, literally 2 minutes before the end of the previous episode, right, killing this demon comes first, before me, before everything. We are supposed to believe that John believes that killing that demon should come before literally everything. So Sam is pretty rightly pissed off that they are again in a situation where Dean is dying and John is doing jack squat.
Yeah, even in the episode, right, we as the audience have no reason to think this. And I think, right, you could even make an argument based on how much I hate John Winchester that he doesn't know until the yellow-eyed demon shows up exactly what his plan is.
Oh, I don't know that he does.
No, that man did not wake up and go get these things that I can save Dean. I don't buy that for a second.
He's been too driven for that. He was trying to get what he could get out of this situation.
Every time it's contrast. It's what he wants out of it.
And he gets sort of sorry?
Just fuck John Winchester. Sorry. No. It's the same mantra.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think like he gets boxed into the situation the decision that he ends up making at the end of the episode. He gets boxed in because Sam has been pressuring him this whole episode. Sam's been pushing on him, being like, why aren't you prioritizing Dean? Why aren't you prioritizing Dean? I am going to prioritize Dean. I am going to do whatever I can to save Dean. And I wonder if the combination of that and then the fact when John is having this conversation with the yellow-eyed demon, he realizes that there's no other option here. And at this point, he's too far in. And so he does save Dean. He does make the right choice, but we're not really given a lot in terms of his motivation for making that choice. And I mean, we're talking about this episode through the theme of family. And, you know, despite all of our conversations about how shitty of a parent he is, you know, I don't think we question that he cares about his sons, that he loves his sons, but we do question his priority, and how much does his love for his sons actually drive him to meaningful decisions, and what's the impetus for his biggest decisions. And
you're right.
Yeah, even in this moment where he makes this sacrifice, it still feels not.
I mean, it's that conversation he has with Dean, right? Where he's like, oh, it was too much to put on you. Anyway, I'm going to do it again.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like you said, via text, Dean knows there's a catch. There's always a catch. There's always a catch with John Winchester. Woo, Freudian slip. There's always a catch with John Winchester. And we as the audience are learning this, right? We as the audience see that multiple times throughout the episode, right? Of John holding back, Dean calling him out, John holding back, Sam calling him out, John holding back, Dean, right? It's constant.
It's a cycle with them.
And
John's trying to repeat those patterns, even like with Sam, like he tries to turn into this like this drill sergeant. With Sam, he tries to go, do this, we gotta do this, we're not doing this, I'm not gonna tell you anything, you have to trust me. The work, like he starts getting the same, and Sam's having none of it after the events of the previous episode. Sam's like, yeah, I'm done with that bullshit. We're not playing that game anymore. I'm gonna just I'm just gonna go and save Dean, because clearly you're not going to do
early
anything.
as making the call to Bobby. Right? Think about the last episode where we just met Bobby, and the first thing out of Sam's mouth is, I already called Bobby. Right? Who they apparently have not had contact with because of John. And Sam was like, no, fuck it, I'm done. I called Bobby. I trust Bobby. Like that's a very small underlying moment. The moment. I mean, it's Sam. It's that Sam was driving the Impala. It's that Sam chases away the demon with the Colt. Sam is in control in this situation, and he splits it with Dean, but he does not give an inch of it to John Winchester. No, I mean, he lets John in. He's like, sure, I'll get these things for you. I'll give them to you. Sure, you're John, but this is not.
But like, John, that's a side plot. That's a side plot.
Not fit. Yeah.
And
you and I talked about. No, go on.
No. I was just gonna make a comment about how with Bobby, like that choice to call Bobby and to loop Bobby in and to spend time talking to Bobby about the Impala, like, and about Dean and about what to do, is, Sam is communicating the level of like family and trust that Bobby is, even after distance, even after it's been a number of years, compared to the level of familial trust that he has in John, which is clearly like at an all-time low.
Right. And he goes to Bobby, and Bobby immediately tells him, oh, well, this list is kind of weird because this is for summoning a demon, not protecting against what. In contrast?
Yeah, the information. The fact that Bobby doesn't hide things from the boys. Anyway. He's got no reason. He's got no ulterior motive to not telling them. Whereas John has some ulterior motives.
There's a line from this show, Cabin Pressure, which I highly recommend if anyone ever wants to listen to another podcast. But there's a line where this co-pilot Douglas goes, oh, I have never anything less than 7 ulterior motives at any given moment. And that just feels so distinctly like John Winchester.
Yeah. Well, and like Sam, that line that Sam says, he accuses John, he goes, having some stupid, that's your plan, like having some stupid macho showdown. He's like, that's my point. Dean is dying and you have a plan. And I couldn't help it. Obviously, we talk about the episode Faith a lot because it's been really relevant. But this is the second time that we've been in a scenario where Dean is dying. They have a limited window of time, and Sam will do whatever it takes to find a solution. And I thought one thing I really noticed along the theme of family was that part of why I think Sam is so confident he can find a solution is because he's done it before. He knows. He's like, I saved Dean before when we were in this scenario. I don't need John's help. Last time we called John and John didn't answer. So if he wants to just like go fuck off and like do whatever he's doing with these random supplies that he's collecting, like, sure, you go do that, John. Dean is dying. You have a plan that's unrelated. My plan is to save Dean from dying.
Right. He even said, I've done it before. Right. And John's point is that was a 1 in a million shot. And Sam, no hesitation. Okay.
Which the gall of John to be like, that was a 1 in a million shot when he didn't show, when he refused to show up in that scenario.
1 in a million shot. We're literally supernatural hunters, but that was a 1 in a million shot finding a faith healer. I did, and I'll take that opportunity to sort of segue a little bit and say, right, because that's a scene where Sam says the same line that Dean said, right? I find what did he say? Like a hoodoo person and lay
hoodoo
some
priest to lay some mojo on me.
Lay some mojo on me, right? And Sam says it and kind of does a little head tilt, like, wait, why am I saying that? That sounds familiar. Clearly relaying to us, the audience, that psychically he's picking up on a little bit of Dean's energy. And as a sibling, right, bringing this back to family, I would like to posit that not only are we playing on Sam's psychic abilities, but 1000% just on the straight sibling bond. I would buy that just sibling bond without abilities. The number of times when Theo, my sister, eventually listens to this episode of the podcast, or doesn't, no shame, Theo, the number of times that we have the same thought, or one of us has an emotion or an experience and the other one across the country knows is astronomical, and multiple times just in the past week.
And I
so easily.
And I have the same experiences with my siblings, the amount of times where we have the ability to finish each other's thought patterns, or to know halfway through a sentence where we're going, like where the conclusion is going to be to that thought. Like, and when it comes to like language, even like that, that phrase, like, find some hoodoo priest to lay some mojo on me, is a very, like, there are so many little like linguistic things that are very Dean about that phrase. Like, that's not the kind of phrase that Sam's linguistic patterns. Sam is a lot more precise in his language. He's a lot more academic in his language. More respectful. He uses a less colloquialisms. Like, he's more likely to use the real term for something than a like kind of pop culture or slang term. And Dean's like lingo is full of slang and full of like idioms and things like that. And so like even that use, like where Sam uses that phrase because it's something that he's picking up on his brother's linguistic patterns, and that's what makes him go, this sounds like Dean, even though it's like such sibling energy, and it's such a well-written moment. And I love seeing it as not just the psychic piece, because I think it's that he knows his brother.
100%. That's absolutely my reading. I'll take that opportunity and also come back to a thread that we were talking about earlier and bring it back to faith yet again. Abigail and I, for years, have been obsessed with the episode Faith. Your listeners to the show will know, I think it was maybe episode 1 that I was on. My episode 1. God, that's so egotistical. People who have listened to the show will know that the first episode I was on, I actually mentioned that the only episodes of Supernatural that I'd ever seen before this podcast were the pilot and Faith.
Yeah.
All of that's unnecessary, but all of that to say, this is a repeat of Faith in a lot of ways. Dean is literally dying.
Yeah.
John is seemingly not lifting a single fucking finger to help and is instead focusing on the yellow-eyed demon. And Sam is doing anything he can to save Dean. But the repeat here is so interesting, because I was texting Abigail during this, a theme in my comments apparently. But it's so interesting because it's the same energy, right? It's the same concept. Sam loses his focus on revenge, or releases temporarily or permanently the focus on revenge, and is consumed with, I'll do anything for my brother. But it hits different. Right? Faith is fairly early on in the first season. Sam is still, he's not committed to the hunt. He He isn't fully bought into like the family business. He's not even fully bought back into pursuing the demon as all out, I would say. He's still like, yeah, the demon's my goal, but it's more of revenge for Jess and less about like personally the demon. And he makes the comment in this episode, we were just starting to be brothers again. And it's kind of odd, right? Because you go all the way back to Faith, where he would do anything for his brother, but it's changed. And it's that choice at the end of season 1. It's that choice between John and the demon, or Dean and the family. And Sam picks Dean almost without hesitation. There's the moment of decision, and then it's Dean. And he does not go back. Season 2 opens, and Sam, 100%, not a thought about the demon. The only thought about the demon is, John, how the fuck are you focusing on the demon? Yeah. It is all about Dean. We are going back to Faith, but this time I'm 100% sold out. I'm not just here for Dean. I am always here for Dean. That rings throughout this episode, and I think it's so compelling. You feel it in every shot. The scene when he's communicating with Dean through the Ouija board, like literal chills. And the rotating camera work, the movement, how relieved he is to be communicating with his brother. You can see this huge family tension that Dean has been pursuing all through season 1 explodes on the screen. There's no tension between where Sam's going. There is no doubt in Dean's mind. It is him looking at Sam, looking through John's journal with just the utmost tenderness.
And trust.
That's it. It's 100%. Dean, oh my God, Dean does not doubt Sam for an instant. No. And Dean, in Faith, was like, Sam, let me go. It's my time. Now Dean has a reason. Dean wants to survive, to see what this next thing can be like with his brother. Dean's been chosen. He feels it. Yeah, and even like the way Sam is oriented in this whole, like physically oriented, you kind of touched on this, but the way he's physically oriented and the way the shots are, I had a moment thinking about this partway through the episode where I was like, this is the first episode. There's been other episodes where I've been, really appreciated the portrayal of Jared, of Sam. This episode is where I was like, oh, you've got something here, like some just like the way he's able to portray that has changed. Yeah, that tenderness in his movements towards Dean, that sort of desperation that we're going to continue to see in Sam. Like we see that in season 1 as well. We see his like sort of desperation to find John, his desperation to find the demon. Now there's this like desperation to save his brother, but because it's about saving his brother, it's also mixed with this sort of tenderness and this gentleness and this like persistence of like, this is what I've learned from the way my brother cares for me, is that we care for each other and that we will do whatever it takes to take care of each other. And it's like it's wrapped up in all of the ways that he moves in this episode, and he orients himself towards Dean even when he doesn't know where Dean is in the room. Like Dean is a spirit. Dean is not even physically there. Dean is physically in the bed, but Sam is still orienting towards the spirit version of Dean that's talking to him because he can't not be, because he's made that choice. He's able, I think, to communicate with Dean, to understand what Dean is trying to say to him, because he's oriented that way. He's made that choice now. And it just is so poignant in this episode. It's so good. It's so good. I can't stop thinking about Dean being willing to die in Faith and not willing to die now. Yeah. And being chosen by Sam, and being chosen, like the whole time he's chosen Sam, right? And he's been like, fuck me, like as long as Sam's okay. And Sam's been like I don't care if I die. And the moment Sam is willing to give up everything for Dean, Dean's like, fuck it. Right? Like we made Dean's the point in the finale. Die. Made the point in the finale that they chose John for Dean. We made the point in the finale that they chose John for Dean. The choice was made for Dean, and Dean makes the choice for himself for Sam. He chooses himself for Sam.
That circles around now, where they're both locked in because of those individual choices.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yep. And this is going to be sort of tangentially linked, but something I noticed in the scene when Sam brings in the Ouija board and is like, this is how we're going to communicate, is Dean's skepticism. Because what I found really, really interesting in that is that, and we've talked about this in a couple of other episodes, where Dean exhibits this sort of skepticism towards things in the lore, things in the supernatural world. We saw this again, we're going to come back again in Faith. We saw this where Dean was like, a faith healer, like, come on, that's not real. Was a couple of other episodes where Dean's skeptical about, this thing can't really exist, right? And same with the Ouija board. He's like, that's not going to work, this is dumb. But he's still convinced he can communicate with Sam. He really believes in like the power of their family bond, the power of their sibling bond, even when he's skeptical about everything else in his legitimate line of work. Like this is their entire world, and he's skeptical about it. But he's not skeptical about his ability to get through to Sam.
Hear me out.
When he's half dead.
Hear me out.
Okay, yep.
Family is faith.
Oh yeah.
Just
yep.
Obviously, but God.
Yep.
Poetic cinema.
Yes, and so much of a thread through the whole first season, and going now into this, like, that's the way we're getting the second season framed, is what do these characters believe in? And for the brothers, it's each other. For John, it's, I think, in his own ability to manipulate the situation, even taking away, even if his manipulation is for, quote unquote, good reasons, that's what John's faith is in. His faith is not in the family relationships. It's in his ability to strategize and manipulate the situation. But Sam and Dean's faith is in each other and in their bond and in their trust for each other, their trust in John, even when it's misplaced, their trust in Bobby. That's how we're getting this season framed already in the first episode. We're getting that family theme just so strong.
Yeah. Family as a mutual choice.
Yes.
Chosen family and blood family. They're in it together for each other. It's fine. It's fine. I feel neutral.
we feel no feelings about these themes. No, none at all.
I think also in terms of, I love being on episodes with Claire because they always push me to consider things from like different meta levels more than just the narrative level. I used to bitch about on Tumblr nonstop. But looking real,
we still bitch about it on any platform that we're allowed to.
And any and all. Thank you very much. You can find I will be here all week. It's like sometimes I don't always consider it from that perspective, but I think hear me out. I think the construction of the episode is very it's not a bottle episode. It's not. They move far too much for that. But for Dean, right, being set in the hospital in this very interesting way, it's not quite a maze. It's not quite a labyrinth. He never hits the point of trapped in the hospital because it's that he's trapped in his like body. Limbo is trapped in limbo. But the directing choice to have those cool tones contrasted with like sort of the warmth and shadow of Sam's, and these contrasting sort of settings to move between, married in the Ouija board scene. I don't know that I necessarily have a point here, but I was thinking about it. I was like, I really like this. I really like how this episode's set up like this. Abigail, you have a face like you've got a point. Bring it.
Yeah, I want to connect it to Faith again because we've been drawing the parallels between these two episodes. And so Faith similarly has very few locations. They are constantly shuffling back and forth between mostly the tent and like some of the surrounding area. So we get the same like kind of they're not actually trapped, but they are sort of trapped in this scenario, in this location, until they can figure it out. And in that episode, we've also got really cool tones. We've got really like dark tones. We've got a lot of like browns and grays. And then in this episode, we've got more of a
Kind of
clinical.
unique,
This episode, we've got more of a clinical sort of like lighter colors, lighter tones. But I'm trying to figure out what I think the comparison is here. But it is that sort of not a bottle episode, but they are sort of in this cycle. And
I feel very mired.
Yeah. And again, and in both of those episodes, Sam is sort of like contrasted out of that by being a little bit too large for that scene, a little bit too colorful, a little bit too real, as opposed to everything else. Like everything else tonally in this episode is kind of clinically lit, and Sam is not.
I think you can make the argument that, right, the clinical lighting, like the blue, the white, the pale colors, is very much tied to Dean being close to death, right? They're very, we feel the life being saturated out.
He's so pale in this episode, and that's a very intentional lighting choice.
Yeah, and and Sam being the warmth, like being the connection to life.
Yeah, that pulls.
They
Dean
did
up
it. They captured that.
They capture it so well. This is not going to be coherent points, but these are a couple of quotes directly from the chat that Hannah and I had while watching this episode, because I need them to be on air. They are all John Winchester related. Thank you for your consideration. First off, we have, in the long tradition of John not consulting anyone and not working well with anyone, collaborate for once in your goddamn life, John Winchester.
Just once.
About the scene that where he doesn't talk to Sam and then goes in to meet the demon on his own.
Fucking,
he's the guy in the group project that's like,
stop,
I'm gonna do my own thing, and then does an entirely different project. And everyone's like,
hate you.
It's not good. It's not good. Nobody wins. Everyone's getting a failing grade. And then secondly, we have the scene at the end where John, and this actually is just going to be more of a comment, where he says, "Don't be scared, Dean," and then he leans in, tells Dean something that makes Dean look instantly terrified, and then immediately dies.
Fucking imagine being a good man for once in your goddamn life. I know he just made a demon deal for Dean's life. It does not excuse all the other shit he pulls.
It's really interesting, because I came into this episode like knowing what happens in this episode. I came in really, really wanting to see how I could think about this episode and see, being like, oh, right. I literally remember thinking to myself, this is the episode where I will feel sympathetic for John, because at least he saves Dean's life at the end. And I kind of came out of it being like, the whole way this goes down is still so manipulative that it doesn't land as
it's that I
don't trust him. Sorry?
Like, it's that I still don't trust him, right?
Yeah.
He said these things to Sam and Dean. Sorry. It's that he says these things to Sam and Dean. And we literally, again, and the same as the prior episode when they were like, oh my God, are you possessed? There's no way you'd be that kind. Right, he comes out and he's saying all these nice, like, kind of nice things to Sam. And Sam's face gets really confused. Dad, is it you? Like, you're not possessed?
It's like, really? What's going on?
Was this real John? John's like, of course, son. And again, it's the weird use of son. He's like, go get me some caffeine. Like, that's a normal thing to say. A cup of caffeine.
And does that knowing that he's not likely going to still be alive when Sam gets back.
Right, like, just getting him out of the room again.
So that he can say something to Dean. Presumably, we can presume, based on the evidence in this episode, we know that John knows more about Sam and Sam's abilities because of the conversation with the yellow-eyed demon. We know that John knows something about Sam, and the demon said the other special children. So John knows something. Presumably, the reason he sends Sam out of the room is so he can tell Dean something related to that. And the fact that he does that and he doesn't he basically like pushes Sam away, knowing that that's going to be it. He's not going to see Sam again, knowing that the deal's going to come due right after he talks to Dean, and then he's going to be dead. And like, it's such a half-hearted attempt to reconcile with both of them, where he's like, I'm going to say nice things, but like, I'm going to say nice things to Sam, and then I'm going to send him away, kind of trying to appease him and send him away. I'm going to say nice things to Dean, and then I'm going to tell him something that's going to, you know, wreck his whole
I'm going to
world.
say nice things and change nothing about my behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. And then be like, I don't know what we're fighting about. I don't want to fight anymore. Mm-hmm. Don't be scared. It is
shit.
Yeah. And then Sam has to find him. Sam has to be the one to find him, which is just like brutal.
I want to buy it. I want to have a nice moment.
So yeah, one kind of final comment. Hannah, you want to launch this one because I know what I really liked the way you said it in our little chat earlier.
Oh yeah. Sort of looping it back a couple steps in the conversation to when we talked about Sam not letting John really have the power, and Sam being much more empowered in that family dynamic, that Winchester dynamic in this situation. It's so interesting, the roles that John Winchester really wants them to fill versus the roles they actually occupy. And there's very clearly this moment. John wakes up, Sam's in there, John snaps to giving him orders, telling him what to do, sort of like he's allowing him to fill the role that Dean has filled, of being John's fetch boy, of being the grunt person, of being the
good little soldier.
Exactly. And Sam is like, oh, I'll do it, but not on your terms. I'm not doing it because you told me to. I'm doing it because I have an interest in our mutual interests. And it's, I think the way I put it is, Sam, like John has this role or these roles that they can fill, and Sam has never fit it, right? He was rejected. He was pushed away by John. He was sort of banned from ever being in that role. And so now he doesn't fit it. He's outgrown it. He is not the right shape. John says, fill this role. And Sam says, who the fuck do you think I am?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Because John gives him the list and Sam leaves. And right when Sam leaves, physically on the camera, we see him leave. And then behind him, we see the figure of Dean, right? Limbo Dean, leaning on the wall, who knows that John is hiding something. And it's this immediate contrast for me personally, between Sam not fitting the role in the least and Dean appearing to fit the role, but being much bigger and better at it than John anticipates, right? This good little soldier, Sam is not a good little soldier. He got good at everything fucking else. Dean took being a good little soldier and made it his life goddamn mission. And now he's better at it than John knows. So at this point, John thinks both of them are within this role and they're in opposite ways, sort of in complementary dimensions, screwing with it, going bigger and better than it, which is why they complement each other so well. Going back to this Ouija board scene, they are exact complements to each other, hinging on this point of their skill. I could talk about this.
And I think my curiosity, I mean, I sort of have an answer for this because I've seen the rest of the show, but the scene at the end where John tells Dean, this information, presumably this information about Sam, because he thinks Dean still fits in that role. He thinks Dean will still play that role. He will still, that even after John is gone, Dean will do whatever John said. But Dean is too big for that role now. Dean is not just that good little soldier. And we will see in the rest of the season that what Dean chooses to do with that information is so different than I think what maybe John intends from that. And it's going to be so interesting to see that dynamic continue to play out of them outgrowing these roles.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Sort of
busting the door down. It's the all of our conversations. Let me back it up. We don't have to get that personal. it's these conversations we've had on the show sort of around the family structure. And Dean has this attachment to John that is not because John is a good father, but because he represents Dean's family, right? The closest he gets to home, which is, again, what Dean wants is home, his family. And he so desperately wants John to pick him. And John consistently, up until this moment, kind of doesn't. Right? And I still have my reservations. But Sam does, and that's, I don't know, that's just the moment the family structure both is fulfilled and destroyed.
Yeah. Yes.
This phoenix of what being a Winchester means.
And
they don't even know.
And now we're going into season 2 with John dead and the boys now having to redefine what it means for them to be family without him.
It's very much going back to the beginning. Let's do it all over again. But this time we're on the same fucking page.
Yep. Yeah. Exciting. So that was our theme discussion, and now we're going to move into our going meta segment. In this segment, we talk about some of the particular elements that make the show fascinating, including its treatment of female characters. We explore lore that this episode is building. We talk about pop culture references and any other elements of the show's writing, directing, acting that spark our interest. First up, our category is deaths in this episode. We have 2 meaningful human deaths in this episode. 2 people in the hospital.
2?
Dean. Yes, there's 2. There's
one.
You're
right.
Yeah.
The first woman in the hallway.
Yeah. And then we have none. I've written down none on my list, which is not true.
You wrote none significant deaths.
My true feelings
John
about
Winchester,
John
Winchester.
Am I right? Like, couldn't be bothered. We have one significant death in this episode, and that is John Winchester.
Yeah, mildly,
It's, big deal. It's only 50% of the Winchesters now not alive.
50%? Have you done math?
There were 4 of them at the beginning of the show.
Oh, fuck! I thought you were 3, and I was like, what are you? But turns out you do math better than I do,
Turns out I can count the 4 characters from one family.
Sure, God.
It's okay. I'm doing elementary level math all the time, so it's fair.
I do none math. I do none.
0 maths.
Come over to language, folks.
Next we have the Bechdel test.
Delightful. I told Abigail I really wanted to talk about Tessa here. Who, love of my life. Just the sort of the constant choice within Supernatural to have every sort of one-off character. And granted, I think later on they start going, maybe we should have some non-sexualized NPCs. Maybe kind of, and it backfires. But every one of their sort of contrasting characters is like, what if we had a pretty white woman and she and Dean had sort of a vibe? And that's such a choice because, one, not only are we constantly sexualizing our like romantic Americana lead, we're constantly sexualizing women. We're constantly putting their narrative choices and actions and their power and heft within the story, within this like scope of, yeah, you did this, and also you were hot about it.
Yeah.
But I think it also has a really interesting, clearly unintended effect that we've seen borne out over the 15 seasons of Supernatural, of making the show surprisingly surprisingly appealing to female audiences, plus.
I mean, no, it's no surprise and no lie that the Supernatural fan base is largely female, like a huge percentage.
They were like, this is a show for our Republican 40-year-old men.
And then all of the gay
all of the
Progressive.
entire LGBT teenage community showed up in force.
And we're like, actually, this is ours now.
We were like, interesting that you've written a like devilishly handsome rogue male lead that is coded after his mother and only plays opposite women. Yeah, I'll watch that.
Yeah.
Not to mention our attachment to like horror and exploring concepts of monsters and body, but that's beside the point. It's actually the exact point. But I think it has that effect. It also weirdly makes it, and I'm speaking from my own perspective, makes it a little bit gayer. That there's no normal experience Dean has with another character on the show. Right? They are related to the lore, or they're related to the lore and they're a woman. There's no like, oh, and he interacts with like a man and it's a normal ass interaction.
No, it's always like a mirror to his own relationships, a mirror to himself, a mirror to, like, to his female relationship. Like there's always a catch. There's always like something that it's doing.
Yeah. The inherent misogyny of this approach ends up highlighting the fallacy of the structure. You know, that's all.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And you know, just to answer the question of does this episode pass the Bechdel test, it does not. It does not. Even,
nope. Yeah, the question that I volunteered to answer and did not answer. Thank you.
I appreciate you talked about related stuff that was exactly answered the question, because this is our Bechdel test section, but honestly, I've made a note in my document that I think we're just going to use this as our opportunity to talk about women in the show in general, because the show so rarely passes the Bechdel test that we have to find ways to do these characters justice, even when they're not opposite any other female characters, because the evolution of female characters on this show is really, really interesting. And also important to talk about the ways that they're done wrong by the story and by the writing. And important for us to look at that. Next, we have our lore check. So this episode's got a lot of lore. We have Reapers again. Tessa, the whole concept that Reapers can alter human perception. We kind of saw that. Oh my gosh, it's another link to Faith. That's the other time we've seen a Reaper. Apparently,
this entire time. Are you kidding me? I talked about Faith 82 million times, and not once do I go. They're both Reapers. I need to resign, bitch. I can't lead this podcast. I can't co-host ever again in my life. How did we just get here?
We just got here. But we got here, friends. We got here. Reapers are a common denominator in these two episodes, and they can alter human perception. Tessa says, it's my sandbox. I can make you see whatever I want, which is such a badass line. And also super fascinating when it comes to if she can make Dean see whatever she wants, what's happening in this episode is very interesting. You know, she lets him see his brother and his father. If she's trying to get him to like give up and move on, she grossly misunderstands who he is as a person.
We did not even talk about the fact that we don't know what choice Dean was going to make in terms of family.
Yes.
He was going to say, like, would Dean have chosen to become an angry spirit so that he could still have a shot or see Sam and John?
I'm going to come back to that, because I actually was going to ask you that question in the last section of this podcast. So hold that thought. We're going to come back to it.
No, same brain.
Yeah. Surprise that we're on this show together. It makes sense. Obviously, also in terms of lore, we have the first real discussion of a deal with a demon. And that really great line from Yellow-Eyed Demon of, it's very unseemly making deals with devils, which is just a poetic line. Truly. We're going to come back to this, obviously, in the rest of this season. The repercussions of making a deal with a demon we're going to watch that play out. I'm not going to say any more for anyone who has not
deals with demons. What could that mean for the show?
Yeah. Fascinating. Tessa talks about death. Dean asks where he's going, and she says, I can't give away the big punchline. Oh boy. For those of you who know the overarching plot of this and the storyline of the last couple of seasons, and the last season in particular, the idea of death as a punchline and the answer to death being the big punchline is so interesting.
Groundwork. The little, I doubt that they wrote these things and had any idea.
Oh, they had no idea.
But I wonder if they either went back and were like, ooh, I could pull that. Or if it's just, it probably is just sheer lore happenstance.
Yep, I think it's lore happenstance, but it's deliciously good.
Yeah.
So good. And last comment on lore. You've got some kind of angel watching over you.
We always find a way.
We will find a way in every possible episode to look forward to the gay angel. And here it is, right on a silver platter for us in this episode. I did not look up locations. I don't care.
Fuck locations.
Honestly, we're not going to do
this. Happened in my heart.
And also, we've talked for a long time. I think we're gonna have to cut down anyway. So
don't remind me. Oops.
Next, today we're going to talk about. Nope. Next, we are going to talk about pop culture references. Do you want to read my notes?
No.
Okay. Yeah, that probably doesn't make any sense. Thanks for your honesty there. There is a Tessa is named after a character in a Neil Gaiman story. Dean makes a couple references to a couple of different horror films, including the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze. There is also a background in the hospital scene where they page a Dr. Kripke to room 237, which is obviously a reference to the show's creator, Eric Kripke, and also a reference to The Shining. There's the references in this episode are kind of Easter eggy kind of episode references. In terms of titles for this episode is called In My Time of Dying. That is the name of a Led Zeppelin song. Nobody was surprised. We like our classic rock here in Supernatural World. But some other languages. In Finnish, this episode was called On the Ride with Death. In French, it's called The Sacrifice. And in Hungarian, it was called When the Reaper Comes, which all of those are great. I love that the title they went with in English is a Led Zeppelin song, but I love these translations.
Yeah, I really like the French The Sacrifice. I think reframes John's death in a way that I wasn't willing to buy narratively.
Yes. It gives away the punchline and interprets the punchline of this episode.
Yeah. Gives away and interprets it. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Well put.
And last but not least, our favorite part of our Going Meta segment, usually. We've kind of already covered this a little bit today, but our gaydar section, so sexuality and gender studies. We kind of talked about this already. The only other final note I'm going to make on specifically a gender piece in this episode is in the conversation between John and Dean, when John kind of recounts what Dean used to do when John came home from a hunt. And he talks about, you would come over, you would give me a hug, you would comfort me, you would tell me it's okay. All of those just being such coded as like what a partner or a spouse would do. Also what generally in most fiction, what a female character would do, steadying, comforting the, grizzled, haunted male lead. Very, very interesting.
Dean is Mary coded.
Dean is Mary coded, and here we get it again. Anything else to say on sexuality or gender that we haven't already said?
No, I feel like we covered a lot of it. Who would have known that we'd insert it other places?
Yeah, of course. So finally today, I'm going to introduce a new little Q&A segment. So in this segment, we will be taking questions from hosts, but also listener questions about the episode, particularly in terms of its writing, its filming, and its acting choices. So if you would like to submit a question for this segment, send us a voicemail using the link in the episode description or tag us on TikTok or Twitter. So today, my question for you, Hannah, is this, and it is, what do you think Dean was about to do when Tessa offered him the choice of dying and going into whatever is beyond, or staying as a spirit?
So when I play RPGs with people, we have sort of this running gag where often you might want to make a choice that maybe makes sense or is narratively pleasant or enjoyable for your character. And yet the choices I enjoy making in a narrative more and more, and the choices the people I play with really enjoy, are what we call zesty. Very consistently, like, what is the choice with the most spice? I think the narrative was setting us up to think that if John had waited even a second longer, Dean might have gone. Right? I think they narratively wanted us on the edge of our seats, like, oh my God, we almost lost Dean.
Right. He almost chose to go on.
Yeah. Narratively, bear with me. Do you remember of the row of episodes I've been on? One of them, we talked about Sam and the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And this thread between Sam and the monsters and Dean and the hunt.
Yeah.
This is Dean confronting what life would be like if he was the monster.
Ooh.
And I think, based on some narrative threads I might have some premonitions about, Dean starting the season considering being a monster.
So that he won't have to lose Sam from it entirely.
Yep. I think that's so much more narratively interesting. So that's what I want in my heart.
That I appreciate that answer, because I think that is the more zesty answer. And I think there are legitimate canonical threads and rationale for that having been a choice he could have made. I don't know if it's the one that they were going to, like, again, they clearly weren't going to make that choice either way.
Right.
But if they had, I think they could have made that choice, and it would have revealed some really interesting things. And what we're going to get the rest of the season is we'll see how that links. I'm curious to see if we can come back to this moment in a later episode and see how that's panned out. See if we get some more clarity on what he might have done.
Dun.
That's it, folks. That concludes our show for today. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to Driver Picks the Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and come talk to us by sending in a voicemail or tagging us on Twitter or TikTok. Thank you all for coming along for the ride, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Thank you for joining me today, Hannah.
Thank you for having me. Always a delight. I'm glad I got to do 3 in a row this time.
It was delightful to have you. As always, I love these conversations so much. Next week, we will be discussing season 2, episode 2, Everybody Loves a Clown, through the theme of survival. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.